Wrecker, my brother.
Ooh, Nick, my friend, how you doing?
We're back. Oh, a friend. I'm demoted to a friend from brother. We are brothers. You're my brother from another mother.
Well, fine, brother, fine. Well, friend is a very dear term to me. Like when I say you're my friend, that says something.
You're my little brother.
Well, I'm not
You're
your little brother. I'm also not your
you're
German or anything.
you're strong.
I'm me.
So here's the deal. You're like my little brother. You're younger than me.
Yes.
You're smaller than me.
No.
Uh, you're a little more gentle and fragile than I am.
I'm more fragile. I'm not sure I'm more gentle, but I'm certainly more fragile. At least you make me look like I am.
All right, but listen, Wrecker. Here's the deal. You you gave me a major traumatic experience very recently, and
Oh my
let me
God.
tell you what you did. So I think I've told you this that I'm teaching this philosophy of science class.
And you're using experiments, right, to
Yeah.
to explain philosophy of science, which I like. This idea I like
Yeah.
very much.
Because it's the start, right? If like they can do an experiment and they have to do one, and it's a prolific experiment, I have them replicate a paper and then do just so
Oh,
they learn
nice.
about control, learn about variable, whatever else, right? Um, and then everything else you do after that, whether it's econometric, whether it's qualitative, whatever you do, you're always kind of trying to approximate an experiment, right? Oh, it's one of your little dudes.
Yeah.
Wrecker's
Did
the
you see?
sun just
Did you
pops
see?
in the
He looked like a Pokemon.
a Pokemon. So Wrecker's Pokemon son just popped his head in. Uh, Very cute. All right. So what were we talking about? Oh, experiments. So this is it. So, and I'm not an individual level researcher until I had Tawfiq as my postdoc. I've never done an experiment in my life, right? And then Christoph Mittendorf too, who's now at Google. He was doing some online. So that was my first, and these were recent. Now I'm doing a ton of them, and I'm learning, and I'm having fun, and I'm picking it up, and they're so fun to do. You just do your experiment, you do it online. What's really interesting is even this year, one of my two students that I'm working with didn't replicate the results. We copied the exact same study, didn't replicate the results. We're like, oh, I wonder what's happening here.
I know that feeling so well. Not in
And
experiments, but in my early days after my PhD, where I did survey research, and a lot of that based on some level of adoption, other types of theories. And you basically put all these constructs in your data as well, in your survey as well. Very few of them are replicated. And of course, I ask myself all the time, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong?
so I have two students, and they're not in analytics, they're in like organizational behavior world.
Mm-hmm.
They both replicated a study that was published in ASQ. It's like
Mm-hmm.
2011, System 1, System 2. They copied the study exactly. They contacted the authors for their study design, copied it exactly, did not find, we're not able to replicate the main findings, right? This
Mm.
thing's published in ASQ. So we're like, all right, well, what do and whatever, there were those discussions sometimes. And then you made me listen to these Freakonomics podcasts, right?
Yeah,
Just
the
recently,
Freakonomics
the last.
radio episode on economic fraud. There's actually a two-part episode, yeah.
So the first one's economic fraud, which we'll talk about, and it's the Gino case and Ariely, and they talk to Max Bazerman. The second one really impacted the heck out of me because it's making me think, are all these behavioral findings that are published just bullshit? Right? There's so much, and they talk about in this second podcast the machine that is behavioral research. That is like you do a study, you get published. If anybody's falsifying your study or showing that it's not supported, they're not going to get published, right?
Yeah.
So only the studies that support your finding are the ones that get published. So this leads to bad behavior on the one hand. It also leads to selection of just significant findings supporting previous significant findings. It's awful.
I want to jump in and like you make it sound like this is a function of behavioral research. Like behavioral research, that type of that genre is at the root of some of these, malpractices or questionable practices like hacking or whatever. I don't think that's true. I am not surprised that a lot of studies cannot be replicated and are shown not to be replicable or whatever else. I don't think that is necessarily a function of behavioral research per se.
Really? But
Well,
but the
yeah.
in the Freakonomics podcast, they say this is behavioral research, and you don't have the same problem in economics.
We don't know. I don't know that, but I do think. Well, first of all, like in this Freakonomics episode, that the Gino case, it's not a question of replicability. That's fraud and
Yeah.
fabrication of data and stuff like this. That you can do in any genre. Would it show up
You
more in
can't. How
behavioral
do you
research?
do
First
that
of all,
in-
it's more detectable. Well, I can make up any qualitative stuff, whatever I want. I can make up any data that I want. Science is a trust-based system. If you say I have this data, the data shows blah, irrespective of what data it is, computational, quant, whatever. Like my base position is I trust you. Now I have some checks and balances in place, of course. And, but by and large, I need to trust you. What else am I going to do? The only other option is to say, like, I don't trust you, which means you have to give me all the data. I have to rerun all the analysis. And only if, God knows, 27 experts all independently verify that it exactly is true, then can we move forward. But that's such an inefficient system. We're not doing that. So by and large, look at this. I mean, like, you do an experiment. I trust you did this experiment. I trust that the data that you report in your coefficients, I trust that's the data that you have, first of all. Second, the data that you collected, not fabricated, So I think this, I would say, I do think it is maybe more detectable in behavioral research. You can fairly easy rerun some statistics. You can do check distribution, whatever. You can reconstruct data sets based on coefficients that people publish, So maybe that's it. Maybe we see more of it because we can find more of it more easily than in other genres. Because the reality is, like, when is the last time you've seen the qualitative data set of some other dude's published qualitative paper? Never. The only thing you see is the data structure, if that, right? We trust the goddamn thing, because no one wants to read 500 transcripted, interview pages to begin with, right? And observational data. How the hell are you going to do that unless you're there, right? So I do think that plays into it.
Well, all right. So there are a couple things you bring up. First off, I think it's human subjects, not just behavioral. So in management research, it's experiments because those are, and probably surveys and maybe some others where you have human subjects and you can fudge some things, right? I think it's hard to do for economics and econometric because that's oftentimes public data sets, right? And in a lot of economics outlets, they actually have like the transparency editor or whatever, the methods editor, which after you're accepted, they take your data, they get your code, and they run it all again to make sure that you didn't make mistakes, right? But they do talk about how in medicine, there's a lot. They talked about that one guy who was claimed to do clinical trials that he never did, and doctors were doing what he said. I mean, people died because of this guy's faking his data and building an academic reputation, right? So I think if you have human subjects, it becomes easier to fake your data, right? But then the thing that so that the and there are a couple of things we should talk about, I guess, with the building trust and all of that. But to me, and then just yesterday, I was on a call with a buddy of mine who's doing research on, have you ever heard of terror management?
Terror management?
Terror.
No.
Yeah, like fear. Yeah, Uri Gal and Sean Hansen? Yeah. They have so I'm talking to Uri. Hopefully he doesn't mind me saying this, but he's telling me about this terror management theory where you think about your mortality or you think about your death. And then you behave differently if you're prompted to think about your mortality and death than if you weren't prompted to think about your mortality and death. So
okay.
Like, all right, well, maybe I get it. And then he said, yeah, so for example, in front of a cemetery, people would behave one way. And when they're not in front of a cemetery, then they wouldn't. And I immediately, because I just heard the Freakonomics article, I'm like, that's bullshit. There's no way people are acting differently because that's one of these. I guarantee that's an example. I want to go back. And here's the thing. I'm not going to replicate it. You're not going to replicate it because no one cares enough and it's out there. And
well, it's also not an IS topic, right? I mean, if it's a digital cemetery, maybe. So hang on. So maybe we'll talk a bit more. So the Freakonomics radio podcast worth listening to. It's a fine piece of journalism because one of the things they did is in this Francesca Gino case, which people can read up on elsewhere. They did actually make a concerted effort at actually talking to all the different parties, right? So they contacted her, they contacted Dan Ariely. They did talk, and on the podcast, they do talk to the co-authors and the mentors and the data collator team, the whistleblowers. So I think that's interesting. And I'm not sure about you, but I when I listened to this, I took away some grave learnings and very clear, like immediate implications of things that I'm starting to do or will continue to do now. And I think that's interesting. Maybe we can talk about that.
So let's talk about Baserman. Here's a guy, Harvard, one of the most famous guys at Harvard, right? Is just incredibly prolific, well-respected dude. 2010, Gino and the gang, Ariely from Duke, come to him and they have this sign on the top. If you sign on the top of
Of a text declaration form. Yeah.
yeah, then you'll be more honest than if you sign on the bottom, right?
Yeah.
So they had this finding, then they right, the short version is the whole world, people made money consulting off of it, they did whatever, and the whole world started putting a bunch of people started putting signatures on the top based on this research. And the fact is the data was made up.
Which
And
we
many years
now
later,
found out. Yeah. Yeah.
which we found out 10 years later, and then they tried to replicate it. No one could replicate the findings. It took a day and they, whatever. So we're there. And that, of course, Gino and Ariely are having all kinds of issues with their careers and but the cool character was Max Bazerman, wasn't he?
Indeed.
Record.
Yeah, I agree. Like, because in him, I see, like roles that we have in IS as well. So if you forget about whether or not, what Gino did and Ariely did and whatever happened there, but his role, he's the senior mentor / co-author dude, right? So he was mentoring Gino, I think. She was at the same institution. He took her under the wings, blah, blah, blah. And importantly, in this particular project, the way I understood it, he came in onto the project when they approached him with a draft of the paper, based on a study already conducted. And I'm like, hello, I've seen this like 1,000 times, where we get to when we ask a senior, someone from our institution somewhere else to come aboard and they're like, sure, you want me to help you with the writing? Awesome. I'll get a paper out of this. So I do think this is a very generalizable practice, isn't it? I mean,
yeah. And why do the junior people do that? Well, maybe they need help writing because they're bad writers. But I think one of the reasons is because you want to send signals to the editorial team. It shouldn't be this way, but when the editorial team sees a Max Bazerman on a paper, in their heads,
okay,
and it's on the fence, do I accept or I mean, do I give him a revision or do I not give him a revision? In their heads, they can't help but think, well, it's Max Bazerman, he can handle the revision. Like me as a senior editor, I try to not think that way. But in your head, you see the name of the third author, and you're like, well, that guy knows his shit.
So I've heard two versions of this. Let's call it a signaling theory, right? So the signaling effect of having a famous co-author on your paper. So first of all, I would say that most people that I talk to, especially they construct too much of a myth out of it. So this paper got accepted because this person is on the board. I like, honestly, a bit of an optimist viewpoint. I don't think that's true. And if does that ever happen? I do believe that has happened before. It will continue. These things do happen, but they're not the norm. In most cases, that's simply not true.
Yeah. And I'll tell you this right now. I have Kalle Luutinen on a number of my papers. He was my dissertation advisor, and we have a lot of rejections. So having him on my papers does not, I can tell you from personal experience.
So and I think why that myth is widespread and is refused to die down is, for example, that we never get to see the rejections. Everyone sees Jason Thatcher's 20 papers a year. They probably don't see the 80 that he's written that got rejected. Yeah. Or you or Kalle or whatever. Like, we work and we talk with Brian and Youngjin, and they share a lot of stories about their rejection, but of course the world doesn't get to see them. I had a gazillion rejections last year alone, right? So that is true. So this is why that myth is not dying out. But I do think what is true and what I have seen, and I'm probably have done that as well. I can't point my finger to an instance. Is it exactly what you said? Like, this is a paper on the fence. Maybe the reviewers recommend rejection, but it's sort of like it could be a risky revision thing. Then you look at the author team, and I do think you're asking yourself, is this team capable of turning this around? And if there's a trusted figure on it where, like, oh, this person is known for, I don't know, like turning difficult papers around or whatever, then I think you may be more likely of giving them another shot. Although I do try to do that, especially also with completely inexperienced author teams.
Yeah.
Give them a shot, because how else are they going to learn? We can't just reject them because we don't think they'll put it. Right? The way that I put it, if it's on the fence, I want to give that decision to the author team rather than me deciding what they're capable or not of doing. Right? So I'd rather push it to the audience. Like, see for yourself. If you're invited to revise, it might be difficult. You might not want to do it, but that should be your decision.
I'll tell you a funny story. And this is a total tangent as far as an editor goes. And I'm going to try and mask it so that if the author's out there, they don't know if I'm talking about them. But it was a paper that the first version had great data, but it was just horribly written and it was
Yeah.
incoherent and whatever. Because of the great data, and it was a junior person leading the paper, I gave him a revision. Then I gave him another, and I was very constructive, incredible. It should have, looking back, I probably should have just rejected the first round, but it took like, I don't know, 6 rounds, and then
Holy
it got in.
shit. Sorry. I mean,
It got
holy
in, and
what?
it's a nice paper. And it's one that, I may have been AE on, or it might be SE on. I'm not going to say, but, I was one of the editors, and I was certainly very. And then I thought, okay, I helped a young person get a top tier hit in a great journal. I felt very proud of myself that, other people would have rejected this person. Afterwards, I found out through various means that the person totally resented the process and thought that the editors were total jerks. And and I'm there thinking, oh man, I did a wonderful thing and I helped someone figure out a good, coherent way to get. And they resent me in the end for it. They thought the editors just made them do too much and it was a bunch of bullshit. And I'm like, oh man. So I think there's this interesting dynamic of what
Yeah.
goes on in the editors' heads and then what the authors are seeing too.
Yeah, I believe you fully. But let's go back to the Baserman guy, right? So, like, tell me, like, my takeaway from this, and I think I'm kind of careful with this, but I'm also pretty certain that I haven't done this in all instances. But my main takeaway, he basically said, like, look, I haven't looked at the data really, and I should have. He basically is very apologetic, like, oh, it's my fault. I'm the senior guy. I should have looked more closely, whatever. But isn't the only takeaway that if you're being asked to be on a paper, first of all, dig up the history and the provenance of the data and the history of the paper? Because the one thing I would be really scared of is that 10 years from now, I am, by whatever way, implicated in a story such as the Gino case, irrespective of who's right or wrong here. I don't want to be
Why?
caught in this. Absolutely not.
Why? But here's the deal. I actually see the opposite.
Oh,
So,
really?
and they say this multiple times in the Freakonomics podcast, and that's that, your best course of action is probably to cheat, because you'll get and it's really hard to catch you. Chances are they won't. The fact that it's Gino and what probably is because it's Harvard and Duke. I know of very specific instances of people at less prestigious universities that everybody knows are cheaters, and nothing's happening.
That's another point I wanted to make about, all these hush hush stories and what we say about them. But like what you're saying is the argument they make that if you look at this statistically, or in the long run, you're better off cheating because the likelihood of being caught or whatever are very slim. But of course, that's not what you say people should be doing.
And of course, I don't think they should be doing that. I'm saying that the Freakonomics podcast says that's the most rational course of action for someone who's, I guess, amoral and doesn't care about science and just cares about their career. Now, the other thing that I would say is if you're Baserman, well, what happened to him? Nothing.
And nothing.
This is the most high-profile cheating case of the last whatever. And Baserman was the senior person. He asked a question about the data, did whatever. He's fine. So are there other authors. It's just Ariely and Gino who are because so that's telling me that if I just work on a paper and my young co-author cheated and they brought me on, then I can just totally be like,
really?
Well,
It's funny because like my one strong insight is this: I will be watching even more closely at the provenance of data and the history of research where I wasn't involved from the start. Now, to be honest, it doesn't happen a lot to me. I'm not one of these guys that get asked like, "Hi, I have a paper and can you fix the commas or whatever?" Write the first page. So I don't know. People don't ask me that, but that's what I would do. It's funny that you have a very different interpretation.
Well, there's what I would do. So wait, you're mixing up. I'm not necessarily saying what I would do. I'm saying if you take that Freakonomics view of what's the most rational course of action, the most rational course of action for the junior person, if they're amoral and don't care about science, should be to cheat. And based on this case, the most rational course of action, if they're amoral and don't care about science for the senior person, is to go ahead and add your name to everything, because it never hurt Baserman. It didn't hurt his career. People know that senior people get added to papers. It's not his fault he didn't. But with that said, there is the Stanford president, right? Who he didn't fudge his data. No one was. They just did bad. They did weak analysis, and in his lab, and his name was on it, and he had to step down from the. Now he's still a full professor at Stanford, so it's not like his career is in shambles. But he did step down from presidency. So So that is the stronger argument for senior people to pay attention
Well, the
than
way that, yeah,
the
it
Bazerman
is,
argument.
but the way, like I said, just said, like, I think science is a trust-based system. It is, but it's also a reputation system. This is the we uh, that's what we're doing. Like, reputation is everything. We're trying to build it. We're monetizing it for ourselves. So, and I would be personally, I'm very concerned about my reputation and things that could harness it. That includes that
Tarnish,
kind of
yeah.
stuff, but also like, shitstorms or whatever. So I told this story once when we started this podcast, like the very first episode where I clicked on the, upload button or something in the platform, I was pausing for a second and thinking like, do I really want to do this? You're putting yourself out there, and it could have gone horribly. And we did get some bad emails, I suppose, in the beginning. I'm not that much of a fragile chicken that, but that there is this risk and reputational risk. I think they are there. There's several of these cheater stories where the authors are implicated. Now, whether I get free of it eventually, sure. But I would think that, in my view, Baselsman reputation is tarnished now. Is it not?
Mhm. I don't think so. And as a matter of fact, he has this book coming out on academic dishonesty, so he's capitalizing on it, right? So this is, if I were predicting, this is what I think happens, right? I don't think Baserman gets hurt. I don't think a lot of senior people in the near term get hurt but the dial's moving that way because these things are getting exposed. Because you and I are going to hold our junior people that we work with to a little more scrutiny than maybe we would have in the past. We're going to. I know you're involved with the pre-registering attempts in
Yes.
IS. I think we're going to have to do more and more of that. If it's hypothesis testing, I think we're going to have to, not be very conscious. And with my stuff, right, the computationally intensive theory construction, I think the number one issue that we need to be careful with is p hacking, right? Whatever insight we have is just an
Good point.
artifact of our sample, right? And that's experiments, that's
Anything with
computational
large
stuff with trace
scales.
data.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it's like, all right, so how are we careful about that? We have to start attending to the cumulative tradition. We have to start building bodies of work instead of claiming things on individual papers. We have to build trajectories of work, and yeah, the open science is a way to do that, but it's going to take a while to get there.
It's going to take a long time, and for the I think for in the short run, it's not going to do anything.
Mm.
And we see this, right? So I've just now written a little short couple of pages commentary on the state and the trajectory of this sort of pre-registration movements. And what I'm basically arguing is like, look, now seen 10 years of journals in various disciplines attempting, trialing, implementing some of these models, and by and large, they all fail. I mean,
Do
that's
they all
fair.
fail?
Yeah, they all fail in the adoption and diffusion of this model. Like there's one of the top journals in accounting. They get like 2 submissions a year that fall under this model. Like as long as they don't mandate it, it's not really taking up because it's a lot more extra work. Yeah,
Mm.
and you can't really mandate it in our field anyway. So my view is like staggered. In an experiment behavior research, I have not seen a good argument why we shouldn't do any of that pre-registration, sharing pre-registering hypothesis data, all that sort of stuff. I don't see any argument why not to do it. But computational intensive, maybe design science, inductive qualitative. What the hell do you want to pre-register? It's really difficult, right? So
Right.
we have to figure out a way how that model would play out in different genres. And I think the staggered approach of like where it's pretty goddamn obvious how it leads to benefits and protects against certain behavior, like in experiments, like in these type of hypothetical deductive classical genres. Well, I think we should mandate it. Simple. In other genres, we have to work out how we make it work. In the third set of genres, it may never work.
Well, but even then, I love so with qualitative, as you know, I do a lot of qualitative, and I always used to think, okay, I did all that hard work at NASA. Young Jin and I collected over 100 interviews, right? I wrote, 3 papers on those 100 interviews that he and I collected over the years. Maybe 4, 3. So I fought hard. I was in NASA. I had a NASA badge and I was going there and and you're
That's
telling me
cool.
if I publish a paper, I have to put all my data on someone who didn't have a NASA badge, someone would go there and just use my data
No,
and be able to publish from it. Well, you're saying
That's
no.
exactly what I'm saying. I'm saying that's exactly not what I'm saying.
Well, but here's the thing.
Yeah.
I'm just giving you my on the transparency. So at first I was very much, and that's how qualitative researchers are going to be. An ethnographer is not going to put their notes, all of them,
No.
now I'm starting to change my tune a little because I've written a couple papers on it. I don't want to go back to that data. I think most qualitative researchers, once they've collected a data set, they want to write a couple papers on it and then they're done. It's like, I don't ever want to see that data again. And I think it would be fine to put that data out in the world. It would do two things. Number one, first of all, no one would ever even look at it, right? So it would just sit there. But if they did, there are two things that could happen. One is junior people could look at it and see what a crappy interviewer I am. So then they'd feel a little bit better about their interviewing. And the second is they could use it to publish and have insights, and they could bring these data sets together. They could look at my NASA data, some other digital transformation, and they could have, instead of 100 interviews, they could write a paper based on 1,000 interviews. Yeah. Right. Or something like that they couldn't.
And the third option is, of course, they could challenge your interpretation, which is also completely legit. Yeah. Right. Like, I don't believe what you said here. I looked at it, like I came up with a different conclusion, which would be fine. So here's a different example. Like I have a paper coming out this year. Like it's accepted. It will be hopefully be published in the next issue or whatever. That's a qualitative, inductive theory, blah, blah, blah. So no one forced us to pre-register anything. Even the transparency stuff didn't even apply because it took God knows many years before that initiative came into play. But what we did anyway, we used the open science servers and we made public all the different version of our theorizing, literally the diagrams and how they evolved over 6 rounds of reviews. Now, did I have to do this? Absolutely not. But I think that's a really cool, like, it's a great learning experience. Like, people can look and say, like, hey, look at how our thinking evolved over the years. Like, with the theoretical diagrams, the data structures, and the data sources, they're all in the different versions from round 1 to round whatever, 5. They're all on an open science server. I can put the link in the show notes. But, so I decided I don't see a big harm. The only thing that people can say is like, look how he changed his mind, or, look what an idiot he was in round 3 or something like this, right? But I thought it's that's a sort of, why wouldn't I do that?
That's very cool.
So I want to talk about 2 more things that I took away from the Gino
all right, dude,
guys.
Look at you. You're moving around so much. You're like a bunny rabbit. All right.
I'm excited.
No, you're moving, and what happens is your mouth goes that side of the nut. We're doing a podcast.
Well, I'm prepared, and I have to look at my note. I know you're not prepared, so you don't have any notes that you need to look at.
Of course I have notes.
Where are they? See, you're moving your mouth too. Anyway, so can we talk about whistleblowing? Because in this Gino case, of course, they're pretty famous by now. They got this data collada team, like people that spent their time on like digging up this data and reanalyzing and basically constructing evidence to suggest it's a fraud. That's what they've done. Now we have whistleblowers too, right? In our field, like,
do we?
Well, I think so. Like they have, the second problem that we can talk about this later, how transparent, how widely known is any of this? But yes, of course, we have whistleblowers. We have people that write emails to our ethics boards and the journal editors and, make allegations about misconduct by other parties. Some of them do that with their name. Some of them do that anonymously.
You know what I got? I got an email from Whistleblower and IS.
See?
So this is what happened. We're at Hicks, and we have the DITE mini track, so Digital Innovation, Transformation, and Entrepreneurship. And apparently an author team sent the same paper to ISIS. So someone found the Hicks paper. They looked at the ISIS paper and sent us a note saying that these are the same paper. So then we didn't know what to do. I've never run into this before. And,
really?
We had this discussion and we're like, is this bad? Is it? And then we decided that, submitting the Hicks paper after it's submitted to ISIS actually is bad. It actually goes against the Hicks. So ISIS, it can still be out there, but it goes against the Hicks standards and policies. Yeah. So we had to actually remove it from the proceedings the week before Hicks. So this paper is not available through Hicks, even though they got in. We did let them present, though, because it was just a week before. So we figured they were probably already in Hawaii or en route to Hawaii.
Well, did you talk about them, about what they've done? Like in my experience, I've seen this plenty of times. In 90% of these cases, they're inexperienced. They literally didn't know that you're not allowed to do this because no one told them, right? Is that what happened here too?
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things where there are different philosophies, right? There are two different philosophies about conference papers. One is, well, it's all just opportunities to present and get feedback, right? So they're throwaways. The big paper is the journal. So
Yeah.
I know people who have the same paper and they submit it to say three different conferences before they ever submit it to a journal, right? My The way I was kind of raised in academia was you get one conference or workshop for a paper per paper. After that, you got to go to a journal. I don't have any duplicates across workshops or it's one and done with the presenting, and then you have to go to a journal. And I think that's because different conferences have different policies. Like, for example, Academy of Management, only 10% of the papers that are accepted make it into the proceedings. So the other 90%, you're just basically doing a presentation. No one ever sees your paper. The abstracts are available online. And then, so it's easy to think, okay, I have an AOM. I could send the same paper to ISIS the next year.
Well, the way that I brought up was more like the second way that you described. I was brought up in an IT in this faculty, right, in the software engineering department. First of all, like conferences matter more to journals these days. This is 20 years ago, right? Second, these conferences had copyright assignments. Like they were published as books, proceedings. You know, we had them back in the day, right? Real books, and people would collect them or whatever else. So we learned for Shred Up, you can't double dip. You can't double submit because, first of all, you actually do assign copyright. It's not yours anymore. And secondly, that's kind of like you can't submit the same paper to two different journals, right? It was the equivalent. So it was always a no-no, but I learned it from the start. And I think a lot of people literally don't learn these things in their training if they ever get any training, right?
Yeah.
So I do like most of the case, I've seen this a couple of times, especially on the conference level. And most of the time, it's not someone willfully or whatever with evil, malicious intent doing that. It's really, oh, you're not supposed to do this. I didn't even know. That's usually what happens.
All right. So what's Reckers Rule? What's Reckers Rule for conferences?
Well, I kind of like what you said. Like, I do think it makes a lot of sense to workshop a paper at a conference. To me, a conference is an opportunity to get feedback and, you know, maybe socialize an idea. In fact, I would love a model where you can go to conferences and present on a recently accepted paper. Now, again, in computer science, they have that, which I love. Right. I just have this paper. I want to socialize. I want to make sure people read it. I want to, you know, that they know the idea. To me, right now, that would be more valuable than but what we do at the moment is we are sending papers in progress or, you know, papers that we're developing further for journal. We do want some feedback. And if there's a deadline that is opportune, like timing wise, we'll take that. But I've, you know, over recent years, probably submitted more journal papers that I haven't submitted to conferences, and I try to workshop them in other ways, like give presentations, you know, seminars, these sorts of things, and maybe give it to friends or whatever. What I don't do is here's a conference is the end stop of my effort. I hate that. I do hate that. I think they're just not done. They're not complete. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll say this, I think it helps me make my argument. So when I present a paper in a conference, especially earlier in my career, it would help me tell the story. And really any paper is storytelling. And you have to set up your conversants, you have to set up the problematization, and you have to say how you're extending it. When you say it verbally, you can't hide behind the lit review and the bullshit that you put in a paper, right? It's not bullshit, but the you can't hide behind the volume, I guess. Your substance. You need to tell a story. So especially earlier in my career, I always, you know, put a lot of pressure on myself to do a decent job with presentations.
Yeah.
And you have to tell a story. You have to keep interest. And then that would actually reflect back on how I wrote the final paper, how I prepared my presentation for the conference, you know? So
I think it's a very good test because if I can't tell you my story and my argument without me stuttering, mumbling, like figuring out while I'm presenting, that it doesn't work, and the audience, you notice that when the audience doesn't get it and they start looking confused or whatever, then you know that this, whatever your story is, isn't working. It won't be working in a written way. So that's why I do it a lot. And I think all of my big papers or whatever, they've all been workshopped like gazillion times, some of them like 20 times easily. Yeah. So, you know, the paper that I just referred to, I'm pretty sure I presented at least 10 universities over the course of all these revisions, right? Always trying this new framing, trying the new story, trying this, trying that, and see whether, first of all, I can make it work, A, and the second test is whether it works with the audience. Circa calls this the beer test. You know the beer test?
What's the beer test?
The beer test is that after a beer or two, you explain to me what the story is, and then you have to be able to explain it to me after 2 beers, and me after 2 beers have to be able to get it. If you pass the beer test, then you can submit your paper.
Very nice. That's funny. All right, so we have the beer test. And we have Reckers Rule for one conference and done. We'll call that the Berenti Recker Rule because I
No,
said it
it's a
first. You
Berenti
just
rule.
agreed with me.
Yeah.
It's the Berenti Rule.
It's your Berenti rule. You need to have a rule as well.
All
I
right.
wanted to ask, what's your view on this whistleblowing, especially the anonymous whistleblowing? Like, there's two arguments, right? One of them is saying like that's good, right? It's a safeguard mechanism. Like, we have ways in which we can, like express these allegations and launch investigation, etc. That's important because then we can figure out the fraud and stuff like this. There's also the counter argument that basically says, look, I'm not worried. We have watchdogs. We have a police. I can't be free anymore because I have to assume that someone's, I can't stop anyone making all sorts of allegations, correct and incorrect ones, right? Not all
Yeah.
allegations turn out to be true, right? Do you have a
Yeah.
view on that? Like, for example, whistleblowing, but only with your full name, or?
I don't have a view. I guess the only reflection I had about that is, as I mentioned to you, I know of a couple cheaters, right?
Yeah.
That are either in our field or adjacent to our field. And I was thinking, would I put in, and this was just a thought, I wouldn't actually do anything, but it's like, would I put in the effort? Or would I put it in a PhD seminar to have the PhD students try and, verify or something? Because oftentimes it's the PhD students who find the errors, right, with some of these cheaters.
I have a view on these cheaters.
And then I'm thinking, why would I do that? Right? That person's career, it's not like they're at Harvard. It's not like I'm busting the Harvard guy. I'm busting the guy at some, solid, but not necessarily the most prestigious university. And their lives are already miserable and they're running. I mean, how can you have a good life? How can you when everything you're doing is fake, right? So where's the incentive for me to go do that? And it's like almost like punching down, right? There's a person at a university that is, they find they have a job and they're getting paid and they're running around faking data, and it's not like their lives lost. It's not like there are, in our field. So yeah, I ended up feeling very ambivalent after thinking it through, thinking, I probably wouldn't take the time to bust these cheaters, right?
What? See, yeah, okay. I don't think I would ever spend my time doing this. And this is a little bit of what I thought about the data collator guys. And I'm pretty sure that that's exactly what they're grappling with in their own lives as well. Did I become a scientist to become a police for scientists?
Right,
like
right.
in the podcast, they refer to it as like, it's kind of like the internal affairs department in the
Yeah,
police. It's like,
yeah,
I don't know, right? Is it good that we have that? I think it is important. The one thing I wanted to
yeah.
say, where I do have a probably a more stronger and polarizing view, is what I think we in our field are doing wrong is that, sometimes we share these stories, at the bar at 2 a.m. in the morning, and we tell the story of this one guy who was actually caught cheating. I'm not talking about allegation. I mean like of, very clear evidence that this and this person had misconduct. You know these stories. I know these stories. You know
Right.
what? No one else knows these stories. Everyone completely gets away with it.
And they have wonderful careers, and everyone knows they're a cheater.
No, not everyone knows them. That's the thing. Like, some people know
Well,
about it, but
all the
nothing
old guys
happens.
know. And then in one case, their university actually did an investigation on them because of these allegations, and then something happened with management of the university, and then nothing happened from it,
Nothing
right? So,
happened, right? So
so here's a person who everyone knows cheats, and they're still publishing, and they're still well known and well, right? And there are other stories that are under the table where you hear about a particular cheating incident, right? And it's not the famous cheating incidents that all the old guys know about. Uh, and it just never gets out, right?
and my take on this, what do you think of my take is make a public blacklist. Like put it like public shaming. They shouldn't be able to get away with it. Like, you told me the story of someone that was clearly found cheating. Nothing happened, and he's
They
happily
withdrew the
publishing
paper.
paper ever since. Yeah, they withdrew that one paper, and they published 27 ever since, with no consequence, no whatever, no check and balance to see whether that news story is correct or whatever. They could have just gone on and saying like, well, that was an odd one, an outlier. Next time they won't catch me. So my little bit of a provocative stance is like, I think we should be a little harsher, more transparent about these things.
Yeah. But there again, you don't want to put people on the blacklist until it's, due process. And then who's going to deal with the due process?
Well, we have institutions for that. We do, right? So the cases
Mhm.
that I was involved in, there's a very clear due diligence process where you escalate usually outside of the journal to the association. They have an ethics board, has been run by Robert Davison. He has a committee. They investigate, they contact the authors, they contact the institution, they contact whoever else is involved. And then the rest happens behind closed doors and you never hear anything more about it.
So if the person is busted, then the word never, like if
Well,
whatever.
first of all, the association can launch an investigation. It doesn't have any authority or power to penalize. They can't do anything other than what do you want to do? Withdraw your membership to AIS? That's about it, right? So what they can do is sort of they can forbid you to submit to an AIS journal. But we all know there's like 10 journals that are not AIS. So, and of course, it goes. They refer it to the institutions, yeah. So your home university.
And then your home university has no incentive to bust you because then that looks bad on them.
Well, let's put it this way. They have a better, yeah, exactly. They have a better incentive to protect you than to bust you,
Yeah.
right? Unless the pressure gets too high.
Yeah. Oh man. All right. Well, did we resolve anything today, Recker?
Well,
all right. The first thing we resolved today is you're my little brother. You're like my little brother. Very little emphasis on the L.
On the very little. So my takeaway is this: if it looks fishy, stay the goddamn clear of it. Like if it smells fishy, get out of there. Like seriously, like I'm serious on this. Like if it looks anything like fishy and there could be fraud on all sorts of levels, I don't want to have nothing to do with it.
How about as an editor? If you smell some fraud, what do you do?
Well, as I said, I had to like people asked me this last week when I ran a workshop with a doctoral student somewhere. And I said, well, you do get a case or two or three a year. Like that's what I get a case of all sorts, different levels, I suppose, of misconduct to handle that I'm involved in as an editor once or twice a year. 1 out of 50, I guess. Would that seem fair?
I don't know. You're getting more cases than I do, apparently.
You do? Well, I've had a share, but I had a share also at CAIS, which is funny, right? It's a B journal and whatnot. But yeah, it does happen. Like all the stories, I've seen them before. Not often, absolutely not often. But also, it's not a high profile field like organizational behavior, applied psychology, economics. It always reminds me how small and to some point insignificant our field is. So it's not as high pressure, and I would think that there's more high pressure. The other takeaway from me is the way that I always put it is, of course, there's doping in tennis. I would never be so naive to think that there's no fraud, misconduct in our field. Of course, there is. In any system with pressure that can be gamed, people will game the system. Legally, illegally, ethically, unethically, things skirting the line. Of course, we have that. It'd be stupid and naive to think that we don't, that we are somehow the only discipline where we don't have that.
It would be nice to know, it would be nice to know that the people rewarded are for the most part not behaving in bad, right? The exactly. Editors at our top journals are not only strong researchers, but really
custodians.
Clean ethical backgrounds, right? And I would like to know that all the senior editors at ISR and MISQ are clean as a whistle, right? And if they are, then it's good. But if they're not, you don't appoint them to those. And I wonder if that's even in the, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I guess oh geez, I forgot my third point.
All right, well, Recker, we'll think about it. But here's the deal: this season. So this is what I think we should do. Number one, we're having a bunch of guests. So we're going to have a lot of fun with our guests.
We have great guests, and I sent a poster out that already, but it's fantastic. A really great lineup. Everyone said yes, too. Did we get anyone that said declined or invite? No. It'll be fantastic. Yeah.
No, we're going to have Gord, Birch, and Brad Greenwood.
We're going to have Hila and Shyla on. We got Carolina on. We got Jason on. We got Jan on. Beautiful guests.
JVB. His name's JVB because there's like Jan Recker, and then there's Jan Mendling, and then there's Jan van Broek. It's like this whole country of Germany. Every major professor's name is Jan. And then there's Stefan Seidel.
Stefan. See the pattern? Do you see the pattern? There's a pattern there.
So we have to give you guys different names. And you are a Recker. Jan van Broek is JVB. And I told him that once. I'm like, you're JVB. He goes, I am? Brilliant. He loved it. I'm like, all right,
he loves a lot of things.
You're JVB. And then Mendling is Jaybird. which I don't think that caught on beyond me. I'm the only person maybe who calls them that. And then, well, anyway, all right. So we're going to have our guests. And then here's another thing I think we should do this year. Because I was listening to Freakonomics, I listened to those two. And then afterwards, they played a repeat from the old days.
They did.
There are other podcasts I listen to that do that. When they're down a week, they play old ones. And then I ran into that recently where I was talking to a young person who listens to all our stuff. And they're like, it's such a bummer when you go, and I go, well, do you ever go back and listen to it? Well, no. So
Yeah.
that's when I realized what we should do is
It's
select our favorites.
reruns.
Because now we're
Wow.
building a pretty good body of work. Like we could do our season, and then in the off season, let's just post every other week anyway. Just our favorite. We could follow a theme. We could do whatever. Just something from the old days.
Yep, we can do this. By the way, I told you that offline last year. The most downloaded episodes were the ones that had ChatGPT in the title.
Oh God.
Oh god! And the third one was Paul Leonardi. Paul Leonardi was a blast, of course. Yeah. So people, I think this will be a great season. I'm down from my usual slump in November, where Nick has to pick me up, and now I'm all excited to get this going again. Nick, thanks for staying on for your fourth year. This is the fourth round revision of this
No
podcast.
way.
But we haven't been good. Like we haven't done any major revision of this podcast. We're like in the fourth round of minor revisions of this podcast.
Well, and we haven't gotten in trouble, which is interesting because we're both running our mouths. And the closest I've gotten into trouble is I've had people tell me I'm not an alpha male. I've had people tell me I'm a big mouth. I've had a variety of things, but and then you got busted for swearing, right? For cursing,
my language, and just my general misdemeanor.
Yeah, these are little. No one has listened to our podcast to try and bust us for some huge,
So the call is out there, people. Go and bust us. Tell us what we're wrong. And, as usual, let us know what we should be talking about. We're back now for 2024. And this was just the opener. Nick, good talking to you as usual. And see you next time.
All right, my little brother. See you.
That's not a thing.